Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone around the world. It's very good to see everyone today. Thank you for coming. Okay, let's go ahead and begin. Our chapter 28, encouragement from Bodhisattva Universal Sage or Universal Virtue or Universal Good, commonly known in Sanskrit as Samantabhadra. As we always do, we do begin with an opening recitation from the chapter. These are excerpts from chapter 28, and I hope that you would join me in chanting this in English together as we begin our formal presentation. Those who receive, embrace, read, and recite it, comprehend its meaning, will have the hands of 1,000 Buddhas extended to them. They will have no fear and will not fall into an evil state of existence. Be their merits and benefits universal sage in the last 500 years. Those who receive, embrace, read, or recite the Dharma Flower Sutra will go to place of the way, destroy the Mara hordes, and attain supreme perfect awakening. Roll the wheel of the Dharma, beat the drum of the Dharma, blow the conch of the Dharma. Forth the reign of the Dharma, and sit on the lion seat of the Dharma. Of a great assembly of heavenly and human beings, people receive, embrace, read, recite, rightly bear in mind, practice, and copy Dharma Flower Sutra. They will see Shakyamuni Buddha is no different from hearing this sutra directly from the Buddha's mouth. Will have the hand of Shakyamuni Buddha laid upon their heads, will be wrapped in the robes of Shakyamuni Buddha. Universal sage, when you see the receivers and embracers of this sutra, should stand up and welcome them from afar, just as if you were paying respect to the Buddha. Setting the scene. This is the final chapter of the Lotus Sutra. It is one of the later chapters added, we think somewhere around 150 of the Common Era, although there is some disagreement to that. Although everyone does agree this was added in the fourth tranche of the Lotus Sutra. The Buddha is speaking with Bodhisattva Universal Sage, Samantabhadra. And the Lotus Sutra itself opens in the east and sets in the west. This will become important later in the presentation. And just to remind us, the Lotus Sutra was constructed in these three assemblies at two different locations. The locations were Mount Sacred Eagle, and then up in space in the ceremony in the air. And the first assembly was the former assembly on Mount Sacred Eagle, and then the middle, of course, the ceremony in the air. And the latter, where we are now in this phase, is the latter assembly on Mount Sacred Eagle. And each assembly was led by a different bodhisattva. It began with Manjushri, who is foremost known for wisdom in the law of appearance or the trace gate, and Maitreya, who is foremost in compassion and is the future Buddha to be, was leader of the law of origination, or the original gate. And again, finally, as we come back to earth, universal sage, Samantabhadra, who is foremost in practice. And a quick review of the Lotus Sutra itself. And this is from Reverend McCormick's presentation on the Lotus Sutra that he just gave recently and is now on our YouTube channel. And I'm going to read from his words. Traditionally, it is believed that the Lotus Sutra was taught by Shakyamuni Buddha during the last 8 years of his life. Here is what K.G. Mamiya says about this in the History and Teachings of Nichiren Buddhism. Quote, from the standpoint of the believer, this position is fine. However, from an academic standpoint, we cannot assert such a thing. A Buddhist historian would assert that there is no evidence that the historical Shakyamuni Buddha taught the Lotus Sutra. In other words, the Lotus Sutra is not a direct record of the historical Shakyamuni's teaching. In that case, when, where, and by whom was the Lotus Sutra produced? End quote. It is most probable that the Lotus Sutra was composed by male Buddhist monastics who believed in the Mahayana vision over the course of almost 3 centuries. In 1934, the Japanese scholar Fusei Kogaku published his theory of how the Lotus Sutra was composed in a work called History of the Formation of the Lotus Sutra, Hokkekyo Se Ritsu Shi. This theory, with some minor revisions and refinements, is still largely upheld. According to this theory, the first part of the Lotus Sutra to appear were the verses in chapters 2 through 9. These were probably composed in the 1st century before the Common Era, several hundred years after Shakyamuni's deceased. Next to appear were the prose portions of those chapters, which were probably added by the end of the 1st century of the Common Era. In these chapters, the dialogue is between the historical Buddha and his historical disciples. Around the end of the 1st century of the Common Era, chapters 10 through 22 were composed, with the exception of chapter 12, the Devadatta chapter. Chapter 1, the introduction, was also added at this time, and here the Bodhisattvas such as Manjushri, Medicine King, Maitreya, appear as part of the assembly and engage in dialogue. It is also in these chapters that stories are told and events occur which transcend our ordinary understanding of time and space. Finally, around 150, Common Era, until perhaps as late as 220 of the Common Era, chapter 12, Devadatta, and also the chapters 23 through 28 which we're studying today, were added to the Lotus Sutra. Chapter 12 dealt with the attainment of Buddhahood by evildoers and women, people who were believed to be incapable of Buddhahood, at least in their own lifetimes. Chapters 23 through 28 are a kind of appendices dealing with the various bodhisattvas and other beings and their practice of the Lotus Sutra, and the protection and support they pledge to give other practitioners. It is, however, worthwhile to consider that the Lotus Sutra, in the form translated as Myoho Renge Kyo by Kumarajiva, actually originated in the Kushan Empire of Huiji, the easternmost region of the Hellenistic world, a crossroad of Roman, Greek, Persian, and Indian cultures, and thus embeds values that are more universal to mankind rather than purely sectarian or ethnic. Nichiren was aware of this, as he placed a special laudatory inscription on a mandala produced in 1274, specifically mentioning Japan, China, and Huiji. He was also definitely familiar with the great Tang records of the western regions, and even mentions the Kushan king Kanishka the Great in a major essay known as the Soya Nudo Dono Moto Gosho. So that covers a bit of our history. Now let's quickly review what are the main themes of this particular chapter. First, it's all about practice. This is putting into practice everything that we have learned so far. Introducing us the 4 requirements, which really defines what our mental state should be when we sit down to practice and then when we engage in life itself. And assuring us that when we do practice, the hands of the Buddha are metaphorically laid upon us, which continues forth into our Sangha when we all see each other and support each other and love each other. And then the interchangeability of Sutra and Buddha, So when one hears the words of the sutra, when one speaks the words of the sutra, one can then say that they are actually the words of Shakyamuni being expressed or manifested in this beautiful moment. And then again, it reviews this place of practice idea. Where is the place of practice? And it reminds us that the place of practice is wherever we practice. And then finally, Samantabhadra, universal good, does offer another set of dharanis for our protection. And before we close today, we will be chanting those dharanis together. So let's move on then to say, who is universally good? Samantabhadra, literally universally worthy, virtue, or universal good, again, is foremost in practice. And he's often paired with Manjushri. He is who is foremost in wisdom, and they form the Shakyamuni triad on the mandala Gohonzon. On your Gohonzon, if you can see in this red oval, this is where Fugen or Samantabhadra is, and then this is where Maitreya, Manjushri is. And then together they form one of the first triads on Nichiren's calligraphic mandala, which is flanking Shakyamuni. And in this case, Shakyamuni, the eternal Shakyamuni revealed in chapter 16, is of course represented as Myoho Renge Kyo. Now, very quickly, there are several other triads that are just worth noting. First, of course, is Shakyamuni and many treasures, who are again side by side with the treasure tower. So this is the main triad. And then we have Aizen and Fudo, who are also flanking Myoho Renge Kyo and represent the next major triad. And what's amazing about Nichiren's Gohonzon is that if you look at it, the entire Gohonzon is constructed with a sweeping upward movement so that it itself is inviting us to rise up from the provisional world and participate in the ceremony in the air. So there's incredible movement within the body of the Gohonzon itself. I would like to read a brief passage from the Flower Garland Sutra. And the Flower Garland Sutra is where the authors went into significant detail on Samantabhadra, universal good. And a huge premise of the Lotus Sutra really expects us to know all of this already about Samantabhadra. So I want to read a little bit of this because it's very, very moving and very powerful. Samantabhadra is present in all Buddha realms, seated on the elephant throne, the jeweled lotus. In this form, he permeates all realms, enters infinite practices. He shows himself in infinite forms throughout the universe, in various forms filling all the realms of the 10 directions. His subtle voice teaches everywhere without hindrance, and he has all samadhis, skills, and freedoms. He has achieved all samadhis, skills, and freedoms in the presence of all the Buddhas and every Buddha realm, and he knows the supreme realm. Through the original vow of the cosmic Buddha, Samantabhadra is physically like empty space. He depends on suchness, not on a Buddha land. In response to the innumerable living beings to whom he manifests himself, he shows himself temporarily in many different forms. In the innumerable Buddha lands of all the worlds, he manifests himself everywhere and enters all Dharma gates. Universal goodness, Bodhisattva has fulfilled his pure vow, and so moves without hindrance, end quote. Samantabhadra appears seated on an elephant with 6 tusks. The elephant is representative of the power of effort. Back in that era, the elephant was the most powerful machine that they had to use and move heavy rocks and heavy, building buildings and carrying heavy loads. So the elephant itself represents the epitome of power and being able to exert oneself in the world to transform the world and to enact one's intuition. And the 6 tusks of this elephant represent the 6 paramitas. And then let's go to the next slide. So the perfect circle, where we look at Shakyamuni in the middle and flanked by Manjushri and then by Samantabhadra, and Manjushri is riding on a lion, and then Samantabhadra is riding on an elephant. And then together they represent this perfect circle where Manjushri, who represents wisdom, and Samantabhadra, who represents practice, is a pair. We looked at the triad on the Gohonzon, they're representing with Shakyamuni as a triad, the Shakyamuni triad, and they represent the pairing of practice and wisdom. For it is from our practice that wisdom arises. Now, also, the Lotus Sutra, when it first opens, it opens in the West, and it now closes in the East. And it really symbolizes that our journey begins in the East with practice. And as Nichiren said, we don't have wisdom yet, so we trade wisdom for our faith in Myoho Renge Kyo. And from that, the seeds of our awakening grow. So the sun rises in the East and it sets in the West, and we begin with practice, and the result is the actual wisdom itself. I'm going to go back. The entire Lotus Sutra itself is created and constructed as a circular rendering. There are common themes that have been woven throughout the whole sutra itself. And the Lotus Sutra is taught in the last 8 years of the Buddha's life, begins with Manjushri preparing everyone to receive Shakyamuni's preaching, followed by Shakyamuni illuminating all the worlds in the East, so he is in the West where the sun sets, concluding its journey, and ends with Samantabhadra coming from the East, where the sun rises, commencing its journey, and vowing to protect those who uphold the Lotus Sutra. So the Lotus Sutra begins with Shakyamuni's wisdom illuminating the world from his position of attainment, so that people will aspire and have the desire to attain Buddhahood, and ends with Samantabhadra Bodhisattva traveling from the point of beginning the journey to attainment in order to bless those who are now commencing their journey of keeping and upholding the Lotus Sutra. We've always referred to this as bodhicitta. So we begin with the result, which is the Buddha wisdom, and end with the cause, the practice of keeping, reading, reciting, expounding, and copying the Lotus Sutra, which lead to wisdom. The Lotus Sutra's construction is consistent with the entire breadth of the Buddha's 45 years of teaching and how Nichiren interpreted them in his Gosha writings. There was from the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the last days of the sutra, the very last words of the Buddha were, and the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus, saying, "Behold now, bhikshus, I exhort you, all compounded things are subject to vanish. Strive with earnestness." So the last words of the Buddha were practice earnestly. And again, the last words of the Lotus Sutra, practice earnestly. Our founder, Nichiren Shonin, wrote in the Kanjin Honzon Sho, his attainment of Buddhahood is altogether contained in the 5 characters Myoho Renge Kyo, and that consequently, when we uphold the 5 characters, the merits that he accumulated before and after his attainment of Buddhahood are naturally transferred to us. For those who are incapable of understanding the truth of the 3,000 worlds in a single thought moment, Lord Shakyamuni Buddha, with his great compassion, wraps this jewel with the 5 characters of Myoho Renge Kyo and hangs it around the necks of those ignorant in the latter age of degeneration. The 4 great bodhisattvas will protect these people. End quote. Your practice is your protection. Your practice is the best medicine, and this medicine was offered to us in the parable of the physician in chapter 16. Our founder Nichiren Shonin also wrote in the Shohojiso Sho, the 2 ways of practice and study, have faith in the great mandala Gohonzon, the focus of devotion for the entire world. Earnestly endeavor to strengthen your faith so that you may be blessed with the protective powers of Shakyamuni Buddha, the Buddha of many treasures, and Buddhas in manifestation throughout the universe. Strive to carry out the 2 ways of practice and learning. Without practice and learning, Buddhism will cease to exist. Endeavor yourself and cause others to practice. These 2 ways of practice and learning which stem from faith. If possible, please spread even a word or phrase to others. The Lotus Sutra ends with an exhortation for us to practice. The Pali Canon ends with the Buddha's last words of practice earnestly, and Nichiren reminds us that we have to practice in order for the seeds of enlightenment to grow in our life. So next is this idea of common truths that are shared across all traditions. On the left is a beautiful piece of art of the cosmic Christ, and on the right is Samantabhadra, and they both represent very similar things. Let's look a little bit more at that in detail. There's incredible similarities in these cosmic archetypes across all traditions. Mahayana Buddhists, Christians, Hindus, other wisdom traditions were all expressing their sense that the universe is a unified field of activity that seems to be functioning to bring about liberation, and they each personified this into different figures: Christ, Samantabhadra, great bodhisattvas, great deities. And for us, in our form of Buddhism, this is the Buddha and the great bodhisattvas, such as universal sage. But are they real or are they metaphoric? And I'm going to read another passage from the Flower Garland Sutra. Then Sudana, contemplating the body of the enlightened being universally good, saw equality of universal love and compassion, equality of spiritual transformation, of awakening and liberation. And then he said, may all beings in the 10 directions be happy and well. These great figures like Samantabhadra or the cosmic Christ not only personify all the good deeds of the Buddha or God, but also manifest in and through our own meritorious actions. When the sutras speak of protection and ceremonies such as offering dharanis, who or what is doing the protecting? It's us and those of us around us. And it's the whole universe working through the whole universe, through the 10 realms. The Bodhisattva realm can be considered to be a cosmic entity, but please remember that this conceptualization is another skillful means, as there are no actual fixed permanent entities. If we get like, we're not permanent, neither is the cosmic Christ, neither is Samantabhadra. Everything in the universe is subject to the same laws of dependent origination, emptiness, and the middle way. If we get caught up in affirming or denying Samantabhadra or the cosmic Christ, we lose sight of the fact that we should always be clear there is no unchanging, permanent, and independent thing, being, or phenomena. Meditation practices such as visualizations and dream work is intended to personify all the merit of Buddhahood, and then imagined this person pervading all time and space into the ceremony in the air, going beyond clock time, and then appearing to one as a confirmation that one's practice is not only on the right track, but is also progressing. Chapter 28 of the Lotus Sutra adopts all this by equating his practice with the 5 practices of keeping, reading, reciting, expounding, and copying the Lotus Sutra. These types of visualization meditation practice is using our right brain to bring our unconscious forward through active imagination centered on the Dharma. And it is good for us all to know that we have such advanced practices in the Nichiren tradition. It's not just other, we look like kids in a candy store through the glass at all that goodies, and like, why don't we do that kind of stuff? We do. But remember, these are secondary supporting practices that should only be done with an experienced guide and meditation teacher, such as Reverend McCormick, in a suitable proper setting, such as inside a temple or at a retreat, where we can make sure that people are doing it properly and they're guided and they're protected. Our primary practice is always going to be chanting Daimoku, so always index on that. I'm going to pause because I see we have 3 chat bubbles. Reverend McCormick, are there questions?
Just an earlier question about what does it mean to that Samantabhadra depends on suchness, not the Buddha land. And I just wrote that Samantabhadra depends on the universal reality, which is empty of any specific characteristic, and not on a specific pure land that is located in some particular time or place. And that was it.
Beautiful. Hey, thank you. That was an awesome answer. So let's dive a little deeper into bodhisattvas and these archetypes, the cosmic Christ, etc. Are they real, or are they metaphysical, or are they functions and processes? Now, each reference, real or process, has useful qualities that can help you feel connected to these ideals and messages. that will lead you to your own personal healing and transformation. So they can be very useful as skillful means. However, again, we don't want to cling to the idea of their existence, nor cling to the idea of their non-existence if you don't believe they're real. In Buddhism, it is our own existence that is really in question. And here again, Buddhism looks at beings in terms of the five aggregates of form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, which are all functions and processes that arise in the moment through dependent origination. Our intention and our imagination are the most powerful resources we have as humans. They really are our superpower. These truths, ideas, are trying to express what normal words cannot, and they lie somewhere between fact and fiction. Trying to describe them through words or images, movement, dreams, we can intuitively recognize these as genuine realities that we experience and other people experience too. These truths transcend discriminative consciousness. There are no words that can express them. They can only be approached and apprehended through experience and practice, through feelings, through our subconscious, through chanting, through higher levels of communication, which include art, music, dance, movement, and meditation. And this is why I personally am so fond and love Nichiren's calligraphic mandala, because he, through art, expressed all of the teachings of Myoho Renge Kyo in this most subtle but magnificent way that is really being able to bring these truths out of your life and have you participate in the ceremony in the air. So looking
you
at,
could say display it, don't just say it.
yes, or as Bruce Lee famously said, don't think, feel. So reality, suchness, we look at that, and of course, all of us have some kind of an egocentric perspective on, well, what does it all mean to me? But others are part of this too. The three categories of the 3,000 realms: we have ourselves, we have sentient beings, and then we have the environment in which we exist that make up this reality. Think of that red box reality as the 3,000 realms in a single thought moment. Now, when we look at bodhisattvas and we ask ourselves, are they real or metaphorical? It gets into a metaphysical kind of a perspective. Are they a real being, or are they a function or a process? Or perhaps it's a little bit of both. But really, these ideas that are being expressed as beings or functions, as metaphysical idea, are universal truths that are personified in manners like Samantabhadra or the Cosmic Christ. And it's this idea of how do we relate to reality so that we can move through it, because we are right now in this moment provisional beings, and we need constructs and we need structure. Otherwise, we would not be able to live. So Nichiren wrote in the Ongikuden, or he actually said, excuse me, he was as part of his oral teachings, as for the transcendent powers, the actions that are carried out instant by instant, motion by motion, by us living beings, these are regarded as transcendent powers. And let me pause for a second. So Nichiren is saying that just getting up in the morning, making yourself a cup of tea, having breakfast, going to work, being a kind, considerate, compassionate person, doing your best, those are transcendent powers. So these supernatural powers that we sometimes get caught up in, it's just waking up and putting one foot in front of the other, because sometimes we know how hard life can be. So it's like a superpower that we actually live. The countless things in the 3,000 realms that undergo the process of birth, abiding, change, and extinction are all themselves embodiments of transcendental powers. This again is what Fudo represents on our Gohonzon, or Shoji Soko Nehan. The sufferings of birth and death happen right now. The Pure Land is right now. We're not going someplace else for it. It's right now, based on our perspective. This is the essence of our intention when we sit in front of the Gohonzon to meditate. We celebrate this continual process flow of creation and connection with all other beings and things as part of the greater ultimate reality, Shoho Jiso, when we immerse ourselves chanting Namo Myoho Renge Kyo with mindfulness and an open heart. Now, the four requisites. This is, again, what I described in the beginning was this describes our mental posture for when we are trying to do our meditation. And this is from the Sutra, chapter 28. After the passing of the Tathagata, good sons and good daughters will attain this Dharma flower sutra if they fulfill four requirements. And when the sutra says attain the Dharma flower sutra, this means that you become awakened. The first is to be safeguarded by the Buddhas. The second is planting roots of virtue. The third is joining an assembly of those resolved to become awakened, the Sangha. The fourth is aspiring to liberate all living beings, bodhicitta. After the passing of the Tathagata, good sons and good daughters who fulfill these four requirements will surely attain the sutra. And then Nikkyo Niwano in Buddhism for Today, he rephrased these in a more of a common way of expressing it, which is one, always tell ourselves that we are caused to live by the Buddha. The Buddha in this case is the eternal Buddha, Shakyamuni revealed in chapter 16, and that we arise through the Buddha. Always endeavor to practice good deeds. This is pretty self-explanatory, but the 6 tusks of the white elephant that Samantabhadra rides, these are the 6 perfections, the 6 paramitas, and gives us a really good idea or model of how we should go about living in the daily world. And then always join those confident of awakening, meaning join a Sangha. Don't be alone. Join with other people who can help support you, because it's not always going to be easy sledding, as they say. Sometimes we need a little help. Michael wanted me to say that regarding the third requisite, these literally mean, the characters that describe the third requisite literally mean right, concentration, group. But here it is not referring to right concentration, one of the Eightfold Path, but to the group of those with right, or again, remember, not right or wrong, but right as in wholesome, determination to, or assurance of attaining enlightenment. This is a technical term from the Abhidharma, Savastavada Dharma, and that of the Mahayana as well. It is speaking of those who have entered the path of insight, who know, knowing not just intellectually, but knowing fully, like gnosis, that they will attain Buddhahood. They have gone beyond belief or just a theoretical acceptance. They are well gone, another word for the Buddha, toward awakening. So the Sangha is one of the 3 treasures for a really important reason, and it's why our Sangha is so precious to us. And that is, lastly, is always render service to others. Reverend McCormick, I see the chat blowing up. So
are you finished with this slide?
I am.
Oh, okay. Well, couple things. They're kind of on tangents, but just real quick. Somebody asked, well, John Martyr asked, or maybe it was Sui Lian, why do we call the eternal Buddha eternal if nothing is permanent? As you were talking about earlier, everything is impermanent. Yet, and I was just mentioning that actually in the dictionary I'm working on, if you look at the characters, Kuan Jitsujo Honshi Shakyamuni Butsu, it doesn't in English literally mean eternal Buddha. It means something more like Shakyamuni Buddha, the original teacher who attained in the remotest past. And according to Tiantai Nichiren interpretation, those phrases Kuan Ganjo, attainment in the eternal past, can be interpreted as unquantifiable, which means practically eternal. And another thing, the character for eternal that's used in the 4 virtues of nirvana or Buddha nature, eternal, blissful, the eternal there actually means constant. So it's not like an unchanging thing. It's more like a constant activity of Buddha as all things. And Nora asked, is the Ongi Kuden authenticated and when did it originate? And I was just referring her to the footnote in Burton Watson's translation, which you've been using, where he says, the oldest version of the Ongi Kuden, for which there are historical references, seems to have been copied on the 8th day of the 5th month of the 8th year of Tembun, or 1539. Also, I mentioned, I believe Dr. Stone and Shinjo Seguro and other scholars have said they believe some of the material in Ongi Kuden may go back to Nichiren's actual lectures. but certainly there's no way of proving that. And that's all.
Okay.
Oh, and then there's a new message. Wait a minute. So it's like saying that the only thing that is permanent is impermanence. Some concepts can't be described with words. Yes. This is from Nora. Yes, I would say that. But also just that somehow in this impermanent, interdependent, intersubjective reality that we're living in, one of the things that seems constant is this compassionate, liberating activity that we can speak of as the eternal Buddha or as Samantabhadra in this case. Stephen Schwishow commented, isn't there a danger of confusing the Buddha in number one with the monotheistic idea of an omnipotent deity? Yes, 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 very much. The Lotus Sutra is constantly being misinterpreted that way. The deities in the Lotus Sutra or bodhisattvas like Samantabhadra and Avalokiteshvara are constantly being understood in a kind of polytheistic savior, external savior kind of way, or assistant to the main savior, the eternal Buddha. And that is why in the study program that I've instituted for lay leaders and for shami and those who want to become priests, I go through the perfection of wisdom literature. I go through the idea, the Prasanga Madhyamika teachings, which I believe are very much in line with Tiantai's threefold truth, to show that we should not understand the eternal Buddha or any of these beings in a substantialistic way, or much less a monotheistic way. And it is very important to understand where Tiantai and Nichiren are really coming from, and understanding emptiness is very important in that. But not falling into the hole of a one-sided emptiness, which Tiantai constantly cautions against, and understanding that emptiness is also this provisional existence, which is also the constant display of the middle way. Every sight, every sound, every fragrance, everything that we experience is an expression of the middle way, which is both empty and provisionally existent. And that constant manifestation of compassionate, liberating activity. Okay, back to you, Mark.
Wow. Awesome. So John Martyr, thank you for pointing that out. To say, as Michael read from the dictionary definition, I sometimes fall back on the word eternal, knowing that it is a very problematic word. It's better, and Michael's explanation was perfect. I would just add to that it also means no beginning and no end, that the moment has no beginning and no end. So, it's eternal, but it's not the way that we normally think of eternal. And I know that, I just want to repeat, we talked in some of the earlier slides about, are these bodhisattvas real or are they metaphysical expressions? Yes and yes. And as Michael, warned us, we have to avoid the two extremes of eternalism and annihilism. And that's why Tiantai and Nichiren, I think, have really best expressed Shakyamuni's original thoughts in the Mahayana tradition. And I would like to just offer, again, this idea of not, taking it to an actual godlike or, a completely sectarian or secular perspective. There's been times in my practice where I have felt something arise inside of me or enter me, I don't know how to describe it, that had a profoundly deep, positive, wholesome, loving, kind, compassionate feeling that brought about this utter sense of everything is okay. And that those have uniquely happened when I was chanting Daimoku to the Gohonzon. So did Samantabhadra enter me? Or is it just the universe working and how it expresses, arise in me? I don't know. But I can absolutely tell you without reservation that those moments have happened in my life. So sometimes it's very useful to work with creative visualizations, active imagination, to take these qualities and embody that into something, man, woman, whatever the image is, a beautiful tree, whatnot, the ocean, and then let that stand in for these qualities so that your right brain then brings your left brain, which is all this rational discriminating thinking, brings it in so that you can really feel it at a deeper level, bringing forward your subconscious. Okay. Um, so this idea of hands of the Buddha upon them, again from the chapter 28 text itself. When people receive, embrace, read, recite, rightly bear in mind, practice, and copy this Dharma Flower Sutra, they will see Shakyamuni Buddha. Just like I said earlier, my experience, something happened. I saw something. I felt something. It was felt kind of real, which is no different from hearing the sutra directly from the Buddha's mouth. They will have the hand of the Buddha laid upon their heads. How many of us have been comforted at other times when your parent or a loved one, your partner, just touched your head and held your head? I mean, wasn't that like, oh, you just felt like instant relaxation? It's a really powerful thing to lay your hand on someone with an intention of love. And they will be wrapped in the robes of Shakyamuni Buddha. You know, a hug, just hugging someone with the intention of love in a wholesome way. They will hear the Lotus Sutra directly from the mouth of Shakyamuni. When Nichiren priests do a Kito blessing, they will lay their hands, you know, when we are together. Unfortunately, over Zoom, you can't do it, but they will lay their hand on the person they're doing the blessing for. They will take the scroll that they have inscribed with various passages of the Lotus Sutra that they use. They will hold that on the person, touch their shoulder, touch the top of their head, rub their back with it. And it's really powerful. And of course, other traditions have this idea of laying on your hands. And it's so meaningful to know we as human beings crave connection and we crave touch. And this is one of the reasons that the COVID virus has been so horrible. It has stolen from all of us this opportunity to be free with each other, to hug, you know, to gently lay your hand on a shoulder or your head, with permission, of course, and to look in someone's eyes. So this connection and this touch that we as humans so desperately need has been stolen from us by COVID. It's just, you know, it goes beyond the fact that not only is it horrible, people are dying, but the implications to our society are really catastrophic. And next, another passage was, those who receive, embrace, read, recite the Dharma Flower Sutra will go to the place of the way, destroying the Mara hordes and attain supreme perfect awakening. And I think most of us probably have heard various forms of this parable of the two wolves. I find it really appropriate for this idea on practice, that there are two wolves inside us, always competing for our attention. And think of this as the 10 worlds. One is darkness and despair, the other light and hope. So we've got the lower realms against the upper realms. And which one of these realms wins? Well, as the famous parable says, the grandfather says, the one you feed. And what does this really come back to? When Shakyamuni on his deathbed says, strive earnestly. And Samantabhadra says it starts in the East with practice. And Nichiren says there is no Buddhism without practice. It's practice. Practice is everything. So let's take a moment together, follow along. I'll try and do it slow. And let's say this together. And as you're saying this together, imagine that you, right now in this moment, are Bodhisattva, universal good, Samantabhadra, and you are wishing all of us together here on this call, and all of your loved ones and all the people you know and all the people in the world, that you are wishing protection on the whole world. Tandai tandahadai tandahate tanda kushare tanda shudare shudare shudarahachi Bodha senne Sarubadarani abatani Sarubabasha abatani Shu abatani Sogyaha bishani Sogyane gyadani Asogi sogyaha gyadai Tere ada sogyatorya arate harate Saruba sogya sanmaji gyarandai Saruba daruba shuhare sette Saruba satta roda kyosharya atogyada shinnabi kiridate. May you all be happy. May you all be well. May you all be safe. May you all be peaceful and at ease. So, what does chapter 28 mean to us? As you might expect, the first bullet, practice, practice, practice. And a short excerpt again from the Flower Garland Sutra. And Sudana is vowing to practice as if he were the manifestation of universal good, Samantabhadra, in the world. I will traverse the paths of the world, free from compulsion, affliction, and delusion, like a lotus unstained by water, like the sun and moon unattached in the sky, by occult powers, swift in all ways, by the power of knowledge all-sighted, by the power of practice with all virtues, by the power of universal love, by the power of goodness all pure, by the power of enlightenment, clearing away of the acts, destroying the power of afflictions, vitiating the power of demons, may I fulfill all powers of the practice of good, purifying oceans of lands, liberating oceans of beings, observing oceans of truths, plumbing oceans of knowledge, perfecting oceans of practices, fulfilling oceans of vows, serving oceans of Buddhas, may I practice untiring for oceans of aeons. Take the medicine the Buddha left for us. Practice. Do the work. Trust the process. Have a sincere desire. Be open-hearted. Be open in your heart. Be open in your mind. Be open to circumstances that arise. Find a Sangha. Join the Sangha. Invest your time and energy in the Sangha, for it is a treasure. And know you are not alone because you are in the Sangha. And as we close today, remember that everything that we talked about today, about chapter 28, and over the last 31 months, when we began with the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings, everything that we have learned over these 31 months is all contained in the meditation container of Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. And I hope that listening today has inspired you, has given you hope, and has given you the desire to practice harder and to chant more. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you.